Hey everyone, Kenan Proffitt here. I'm back in the YouTube game, and here with a Blender, not really a tutorial, but kind of a breakdown of this VFX shot I created with this sort of superhero landing effect. I wanted to just kind of show you guys my node setup and my compositor and the various steps I took to create this shot, and then maybe if something kind of jumps out to you, you can use it in your videos and your effects. Hopefully you guys find it interesting and can learn something from it. So obviously the first thing I did was go out and shoot my footage. I had the help from my good friend Shane from Deep Ellum Films. You can check out his website, link in the description. Went out and shot this with me in a building in downtown Dallas. And you can see there's not a lot going on. It's basically I just jump off this stool here to get as much air as I can. I'm inside the motion tracker. Basically I just did a quick track. We had these tape markers we threw up on the wall. You really don't need them. I mean, the camera's not moving that much, but I wanted to make things harder on myself by putting tape up on the wall. Obviously, you could do a 2D track for this because it's just a tilt down, but I went ahead and did a full 3D track because Blender gives you the render layers when you do that. So that worked out well because I ended up using those render layers in the compositor, and then also it gave me a really good starting point to kind of build out my scene. So you can see this is my 3D scene, and I do have a camera tracked in there. I built out, if we look through the camera, I built out the shadow for this wall, and then kind of matched the geo of the whole set in case anything ricocheted off of that parking, what do you call these? Parking, I don't know, piece of concrete there. And you see I'm just using primitives here. So this was just a simple rigid body simulation. After I cut a hole, I used the cell fracture add-on to break it all up, and then just did a rigid body sim. I actually had this sphere as an active element animated, and then if you step through here, it just basically just acts as my object to create the initial little explosion there. And that ended up working out really well. All I did with the rigid body settings was play with the timing. So basically the speed was set to 0 until the frame that I wanted that animation to start. And then I had a secondary little simulation here. This was actually just a ring with some particle emitters for those small little debris pieces. That way I had kind of an extra amount of little detail in there. And you can see what it looks like in 3D space. Pretty cool. My lighting setup was super simple, nothing fancy. Basically, I just wanted to mimic the shadows in my scene with the direction and the intensity. Didn't quite get it very perfect, but it was good enough for my purposes here. And then what I did was I created a separate layer for my smoke and just basically ran a very, very simple rudimentary smoke simulation. Have a little bit of turbulence in there so that there's some kind of interesting things happening. And again, it just starts on the frame where I land on the ground for the initial impact. And you can see it's pretty low res. I don't want to take a lot of time with my computer baking this stuff out, just because it's meant to just kind of be a dust that sprays over top of everything. Wasn't going to be that visible. So I had that on a separate layer to make it easy for compositing. And because I did the camera tracking and set up my background scenes, my foreground and background layer were already created for me to use as my shadow layer, and I could use the foreground for my 3D elements to composite those into my scene. For the material of these, I just created a very simple concrete shader. There's nothing too impressive. You can see it down there. Just a Musgrave mixed with some Veroni and just basically using the principal BSDF to get a very basic concrete shader. I used an inside and outside material and tried to match the color of the concrete. Didn't do the best job, but it worked for my purposes. I was happy enough with it. I was going to end up scaling it down and doing a lot of color correction and stuff. So once I had that base concrete material, it didn't matter too much how much detail I put into it. So that was kind of the base shader I was working with. And then I'll talk about compositing, how I composited all these elements together. All right, so this is my node setup. And you can see this isn't how the compositor usually looks. I have my viewer split up here so that I can view it clean. I like it better than having the backdrop behind my nodes. I like to be able to see my nodes. So it might look like a ton of stuff here, but I'll break it down. There's really not that much going on, and hopefully you can see that yeah, you kind of break it down step by step and it all sort of makes sense. So the first thing over here, zoom in, this was just my footage that I use. I just have a movie clip node. This came with, you know, Blender set this up for free when you do the motion tracking. And my first job obviously was to, I'll view this, was to get rid of my tracking markers. I had to get rid of that stool, and I wanted a different sky because even though this is the Dallas skyline, I wanted it to look a little more interesting, have more buildings back there. So I wanted to do a sky replacement. So my first step was to isolate myself and create a clean plate. How do you do that with moving footage? Well, the best way is to use your actual footage underneath as kind of a clone and stamp tool, so that wherever your camera moves, you are pointing it to another part of the video, so that no matter the camera move, it's gonna, you know, display a piece of the video footage that's clean. So that doesn't really make any sense at all, so I'll just show you. So I basically took this footage and then used the transform node to translate it a little bit to the right. And then I have a mask here that I created. It was just these circle masks. I can show you here in the masking tab. I created several masks to remove different parts of my footage. So I have a marker removal. Basically, they're just circles. So each of these masks is just parented to the track from the motion tracking here. So you can see there's a track around each of these tracking markers. So those masks are just parented so that they move with my footage, like so. And then I also have a mask for, let's see, the wall, so that I could mask out, just blanket this whole section where this subject is. And then a separate one for kind of the bottom half of the ground, because I knew this is going to be a different part of the video. So a separate mask for that. So then what I'm using in the compositor is just a mix node, mixing the original video footage with the translated footage to the right, and using this mask as the factor. So basically, it's only displaying the video footage translated to the right on x-axis by 20 degrees. It's displaying that in these little holes. And what I'm able to do is basically just clone and stamp using a different part of the footage, translate it over a little bit. And, you know, it's really not obvious. You can't really tell that there's any repetition there. I do have some feathering on the mask, so it's a pretty clean and simple way of doing that. So then I just took that output, my clean, again, translated it over a good bit, and this time I have that displayed in my wall mask, so that I'm able to just essentially just kind of clone and stamp, paint out my whole body there. And the reason this is so powerful is because it's using the original footage, so I'm able to move the camera and it'll still stay stamped to that area because it's locked. It's using the same footage, just translated over a little bit. So really I just kept doing that for different parts to create my clean plate, transforming the footage, masking it out. I did the same thing for reflection. You can see I have some blur nodes in there. My feathering wasn't good enough, I guess. So there you go. The reflection's gone, and you can see the before and after of removing that. There's the before, subjects in the shot, as well as the tracker markers, and there's the after. And again, that's just using the original footage, translating it to find an area where the footage will work, and just using the mask, whatever mask I need to find a different part of the footage, just using that as the factor output there. Or I'm sorry, the factor input. So that was how I got to that point, just doing that method of object removal using masks. And then my next step was to do some sky replacement. So I just grabbed an image from textures.com, did a little bit of color correction, a little bit of blurring, so I got it to match my original footage a little bit better. I stuck that into a transform node. I used a track position node so that it would stay tracked to one of the track markers. and that way I get that X value, or I'm sorry, the Y value of the camera tilt. And it's not the best track, but it's for the background, so it moves a little bit and it works just fine. So that was what the image ended up looking like. And really I just mixed it using a mix node with my footage. And the way I got it to be in behind there was I created a mask for that area as well. So I have a mask for the sky. So yeah, I just grabbed this mask and parented it to I think this tracking marker, so that you know, it gets the majority of the sky. But really I'm going to do a luminance key mask as well to kind of get the rest of that. So I used that mask right there, you can see, and then I used a luminance key mask to kind of clamp, because the sky is so bright, I was able to get a really nice clean matte. But then I just added it with my other mask to get this part of those buildings. I just wanted to go ahead and get rid of those, and it also worked well because it chopped off the top part of my body when I jumped up in the air. And then this car reflection, I made a quick mask for that. I'll show you that. There was just some highlights that the luminance key didn't get, so I made a mask for that one, and just subtracted it from my matte so that I would get rid of those highlights. So now I have a nice clean black and white matte that I can use for the factor of my mix when I mix my background image with my clean plate. And voila, there you go. I have a whole city right behind my footage there, and that's working great. So the next step was to actually start my compositing with my 3D elements. You can kind of look left to right here. My clean plate is just going down to this connector node, and then I'm just a simple alpha over to add my shadow, and then an alpha over right here to add, it's going down here to my 3D elements. So this is the render I got from my rigid body simulation, and I'm not really doing too much fancy, just some color correction. I did scale it down a good bit and move things around a little bit, but basically that's all I'm doing. If you can kind of follow this top track here, it's going into this node where I did a little bit of light wrapping, and yeah, you can see the scale change and color correction I did there. But the light wrapping was very simple. Basically I'm just using the alpha into a mix node as both the image and the factor, which gave me this nice outline here that I could then take and blur a little bit and clamp down the values that I want. And I mixed that into this mix node here with my clean plate footage. So you can see the clean plates going into that mix node. And then this mask I created for my light wrap is the factor of that. And basically what that does, it's very subtle, but it just adds a little bit of light wrap from the environment to the edge of those rocks there so that they can blend a little bit better. So then that's going into this alpha over node. Again, I have my shadow layer going into this node, and then plugged into this one. So I've got my 3D elements composited in. This mask up here, this is just a mask. There's some parts of the render that were going on over here that I didn't like, so I just inverted that mask and stuck it in there so that anything that came into this region would just be eliminated. So that's all that mask is. And then it was time to start adding my my hero back in, which is myself. So I have another little footage node over here, and then my rotoscope matte that I created. So a small little pro tip for rotoscoping. Basically what I did was I rotoscoped different parts of the body. So the head, the arm, the legs, the other arm, and then shoulders and torso. And basically just started adding all those together with add nodes to create my final matte. So the reason for this was, if we go into masking, you can see all my different rotoscoping jobs here. This is actually, if you were to work at a VFX studio, this is probably how they would want you to work, especially for something that is changing positions like this. It's much easier to just focus on one part of the body. And yeah, I didn't do a very careful job, but if you focus on one part of the body at a time, for one, you can get a cleaner mask, but it also actually goes faster for you. It doesn't seem like it would, but you're focusing on just one part at a time. And so the rotoscoping actually goes much faster. And you're able to later, you have these mats where if you need to isolate certain parts of the body, you've already done all that work, versus trying to get one mask to fit the whole character and contort it a whole bunch can be really difficult. And then you're stuck with that mat. So that's why I did them all separate and then added them together. A little bit of dilate and blur, and there's my final mat. And then again, this is just my footage plugged into a set alpha node as the image, and then my mat is the alpha. If we view that, we now have a perfect roto there of our entire footage. It's completely isolated using this set alpha, which is great because then we can use this particular node. We can transform it, animate the transforms, which is how I did the flying. I just animated on the Y value and was able to have them just fly straight in from the top. And then a little bit of color correction, and that's my oh yeah, it's a blur for the animation part, for the motion blur, of course. A little bit of color correction, and there's my isolated roto. So that was my rotoscoping. And then I already, at this point, I already have my 3D elements combined, and now it's just time to add in the rotoscope. So maybe this part could have been, probably could have moved this in my comp, but let's see, if we just added that in using a simple alpha over. And then I created a mask here for the hole. It's just a simple mask where anything, if my body, for whatever reason, if a hand or a knee went outside that mask, it would just get swallowed up to make it look like I'm actually penetrating the ground. So that was something really important, just to help a little bit with the integration. And you can see what it's doing there. It's just kind of chopping off a little. But it still isn't great. There's not rocks that are in front, that are obviously in front. So to get that, what I did was I utilized Cryptomatte, which is this awesome node right here that Tangent Animations added to Blender. And you can add Cryptomatte when you, at render time, just select object, how many levels you want. And then what you can do with that is on your render layer, take the Cryptomatte output into the Cryptomatte node, and it allows you to actually pick, based off of color, using this little eyedropper, you can pick which objects in your scene you want to create a matte out of. And I did that to the foreground rocks. It gave me this matte right here, and this image of rocks that I was then able to put over top of my composition here, so that I have foreground rocks in over top. Otherwise, I'd have to do a lot of rotoscoping or use an older way of creating a matte out of my 3D objects, and it just made it so much easier to use. So you can see the before and after. Before the Cryptomatte, not very good integration. After the Cryptomatte, integration pro. I also did a little bit of a hue shift down here, just to give some variation to the rocks as well. So that was another thing about Cryptomatte. I was able to add some more variation to my render in comp. So super useful, using the Cryptomatte and that mask to give all the integration I needed there. And then down here I have my smoke render layer. This is nothing fancy, just a really low resolution smoke with a little bit of color added into it, and then just added to my scene using an alpha over node, and then mixed it in really to taste to get the look I wanted. And that really was kind of the missing element to help the 3D elements really tie into the whole scene. And then I have this little box here for finishing touches. I was able to crop it in. I did a little bit of lens distortion to kind of make the elements all feel like they're tied in with the video a little bit more. And there we go, crop out my Instagram photographer there. And then this would be where you do some color correction as well, but I didn't do that at this point. So that's it. It kind of looks like a lot, but really if you break it down piece by piece, it's not that difficult. The hardest part, of course, was the rotoscope, getting the rotoscope right, isolating those layers, and then of course the clean plate. I probably spent more time on the clean plate than the 3D elements and the actual compositing. So yeah, that's my setup, and you know, I don't know if this was useful. I guess you guys will let me know if you enjoy these type of videos. You know, if you do, leave a thumbs up. If you don't, you know, go watch a video you do love and be nice. Now, you can certainly let me know if you like these sort of overview videos. I'll certainly make more of them. I know it's been a while for a video for me. I do have a good reason for that. Actually, I've been working at an animation studio, working on some feature films, which has been a lot of fun. So I hope to tell you guys some more stories about that, of how I've been able to use Blender at Hollywood. So I'll be giving more stories on that. But that's it for this video. That's my node setup, and that's my superhero landing. I hope you guys enjoy the result. Like I said, leave me a comment if you enjoy this type of video, and be sure to check out any future videos that I've got coming. Thanks for watching, guys. See you next time.